Hi, I'm Arlindo, the philosophical artist, and this is experiential realism. To all my members, if you always look forward to one of my videos every fortnight or so, I apologise if it's taken me longer than usual to upload the latest one. I've had a family emergency that required all my attention, and in the process, certain so called friends revealed their true colours by attempting to libel me behind my back. I'm not going to name names, but let's just say that I've unfriended them, not because we disagreed politically, but because of how they acted towards me after they found out about my family emergency, and also their inhumane attitude to the Charlie Kirk assassination. Which brings me to talk about what I see as an imbalance between both brain hemispheres reflected by the political spectrum. The conservative mind is very good at following rigid structures, set plans and rules, but their Achilles heel is the fear of change, and they can also lack creativity. They are suspicious of any new suggestions and derive comfort from sticking to traditions and always favouring the familiar. In its extremes, it's a very parochial mind. The liberal mind, on the other hand, is highly creative and progressive, but it struggles with organisation and the structured implementation of their ideas. In the extremes, they want to tear down all rules and norms in the hopes that starting from scratch will be a good thing, and they are dismissive of that which should be preserved, however old it may be. They tend to be young, adventurous, and lacking in discipline. I believe there should be a balance, which is probably why I reckon I'm more of a centrist who is well aware of the fact that the Overton window shifts over time, something I learned years ago from having been exposed to the ideas of the political scientist Thomas Ferguson, whose centrism wasn't a neutral cop-out. It was and is a sensible position, as it recognises that conservatives and liberals need each other and ought to communicate sensibly. The conservatives can rein in the liberals when these go too far. The liberals, in turn, can inspire conservatives to think outside the box and potentially embrace progressive change. Both need to argue from sound reasoning and be able to cogently demonstrate why their points should be taken seriously, without animosity and ad hominems. And all sides need to make an effort to communicate. I've been accused of flaunting a vast intellect by using technical terms and complicated words and sentences which obfuscate key information, I've been told, and these accusations often come from people who demand clarification, as if I know beforehand what words they are likely to understand, and they have accused me of spouting word salad whilst demanding more words for clarification, making me wonder how much simpler they want me to make my case. My message to those people is very simple. How about you buy a dictionary and try to expand your vocabulary? It is true that people can be superfluous with technical terms, and there is such a thing as word salad. And here's something funny. Why say superfluous with technical terms when one can just say people can be pleonastic? But it is also true that one can curtail mouthfuls by being linguistically more sophisticated, and I've just given a perfect example of why it pays off to learn new words and expand your vocabulary. But accusing someone of being pleonastic isn't the worst thing that can happen. There is libel, there's defamation, misrepresentation, and censorship, which isn't the way in political debates, and certainly not assassinations. I was dismayed to learn about the assassination of Charlie Kirk. I didn't even know him well, and I felt for his family. I had only seen him debate a group of youngsters on Jubilee, and I wasn't even sure if I agreed with some of the things he was saying, but I found him to be respectful, polite, and certainly someone I'd have a drink with to learn more about his views, because I think it is always important to see where people are coming from and how they grew up. In his case, being a Christian conservative didn't necessarily make him a bad person. It pains me to learn that a couple of kids will grow up without a loving father, and how much some people hated him to the point of celebrating his public execution. Christopher Hitchens once said that David Irving, a Holocaust denier, should have a voice, and we shouldn't seek to censor or ban him just because we might not like what he has to say. The way to disagree is through discussions and debates, so that others can see why and how one party or more can be wrong. The minute we censor, ban or cancel is the minute we make others anxious about the threat of authoritarianism, and also make others wonder if authority has something to hide. People with obnoxious views or outdated views should be impugned in public, not censored. Shooting someone in the throat because you disagree with them is immoral and a serious mistake in a war of ideas, and shame on those who celebrated Charlie Kirk's assassination. Most of the hideous celebrations were seen on the far left, save for some homophobic Christian fundamentalists who viewed Charlie Kirk as an impostor for stating that gay people should be welcome in churches. And watch the narrative unfold, and how American conservatives will spin this to their advantage, and it'll be something like this. We need to trust President Trump again. Let's forget the Epstein files. The far leftists have no respect for children. They've got no respect for the children of Charlie Kirk, because they don't care that Charlie Kirk left them behind. Why would they? They think it's okay to murder babies in the womb, and they have no respect for traditions and the family unit. You need to get rid of this cult, which is clearly against free speech. This is most likely how it will always be spun in a bid to demonize political enemies, and President Trump will probably find a way to serve another term as the only incumbent POTUS with expertise and sufficient experience to deal with whatever problem they create and name. You can just hear him narcissistically state that there's nobody better than him to sort out the mess. I tend not to trust any politician, and although I think Trump should be praised for the Abraham Accords, I must confess that when I learned more about the assassination and what Charlie Kirk stood for, a dark conspiratorial irony entered my mind as a horrifying possibility. Charlie Kirk was a Trump supporter, and it would not surprise me if it was found that a certain administration took him out, so that his tragic death may serve a propagandistic purpose. To make the enemies look bad by literally taking out his voice in public, I no longer entertain this conspiracy theory, having learned more about Tyler Robinson and his messages on social media. The official narrative still sounds plausible, and we must proceed with caution when it comes to conspiracy theories and unsubstantiated claims. And to also claim that the Israeli government took him out just sounds like an anti-Semitic accusation at this point. But I understand how people felt at the initial stages of the murder investigation. They had someone in custody and they let him go. So immediately you think, how did the real shooter get away so quickly? And where were security and police to do their job at an open air event like that, where people debate political views in public? And media, as it exists today, certainly seems to have created new problems, particularly with youth being exposed to things that we couldn't even imagine back in the day when we were their age. It's young minds which are still developing and being expected to grow up pretty quickly whilst being bombarded with conflicting information and misinformation at an unprecedented level. We were never exposed to that growing up, and when I mean we, I mean geriatric millennials and the older generations, whose brains I firmly believe expanded in a far healthier way in general. So although the hate might have been a potential or even latent in the past, it is certainly true that neuroses have evolved with the exponential growth and novelty of technology. It is also true that all of us experienced the panic of an unfolding pandemic for the first time. And even though our forefathers had to deal with the last one back in 1918, nobody had ever experienced a pandemic before with the way the world is today, with the looming threat of AI, evolving deepfakes, and the ease with which distrust for institutions can be sown, and how fast propaganda spreads. Technology amplified our psychological blemishes like a global magnifying glass, and nefarious actors have certainly taken advantage of this in the political arena. We have increased our potential to be more destructive, on top of the fact that as a species we are immature beings in general, and far too emotional, and like toddlers, certainly unqualified as a species to handle that much power. A kitchen knife should never be given to a 2-year-old. There is still a massive potential for maturity and growth on all fronts. And we must remember and abide by the following. Political violence is never justified, and I am also vehemently against censoring the voices we disagree with. I wholeheartedly stand by the principles of free speech and defending the right of literally everyone to voice their opinions. I have seen some Charlie Kirk clips where he debates students since watching him on Jubilee, and I have not found any evidence of discrimination or malice. And if there is a disagreement to be found, we must all remember that people have their own backgrounds and they can also change their views over time. So, if they're wrong about something, they should be given the opportunity to find out for themselves, and there is never any justification for murder over what someone might have stated in public. Nobody should be expected to know everything either, or be right about everything all the time, and we need to be more tolerant in our society when it comes to a multiplicity of views. The way to disagree with someone with civility is to debate them in good faith, regardless of his views, or even the irony that some might see with the way he died against what he might not have said, might or might not have said in the past. We need to remember that first, he was a human being who had his own journey and experiences, and that he was also someone's husband and father. He was a public figure who should be remembered precisely because his life and death meant something, and just exposed how dire things really are on the free speech front. Nobody should be killed for their views, and everyone should be given the opportunity to evolve and undergo paradigm shifts which are possible with everyone. I feel for Kirk and his family, and it pains me that people are still demonising him. Imagine if it was your father or any other member of your family who held conservative views that you disagree with. Surely you would still love them regardless, even if deep inside you hoped he would come to see things your way. And you certainly wouldn't like it if someone shot him in the throat in public, literally snuffing out the voicing of his opinions. So I have no qualms with saying R.I.P. Charlie Kirk, because although I never met him, I know he was loved by his wife and kids and admired by many, and I wouldn't want what happened to him to happen to my loved ones. And if someone has an unpopular or even offensive view, let them be heard. Let those views, those tentatively offensive views, be heard, so that they may publicly show why they are incorrect or morally reprehensible, such as the anti-Semitic opinions of Irving, Free speech, freedom of expression even, is fundamental to a free society. The alternative is not an option. Otherwise, we sow the seeds of fascism and totalitarianism. Political violence and assassination are heinous and should be always repudiated. If you didn't like what someone says, just go up against them. Go up to them and initiate a discussion or debate if they are civil. Don't hide behind a gun because you feel threatened by their words. The minute you shoot someone in the throat and run, you are a despicable and immoral coward who only makes it worse for the rest of us, who now have to think twice about expressing ourselves in public. I don't have a problem with people expressing their opinions in public, however much I may disagree with them, and unless they are a mass murderer like Hitler or some other sicko who deserves to be incarcerated, I vehemently disagree with speaking ill of the dead, especially only within 2 days of said person having been murdered. I feel for his family, wife and kids, who will undoubtedly be haunted by the horrid graphic detail of their father being murdered. So regardless of his opinions, Charlie Kirk should absolutely be seen as a symbol of freedom, besides acknowledging his humanity, because that's the whole point. As he said it himself just days prior to his assassination, we should be more tolerant of the expression of opinions that differ from our own, and we should talk and debate, because the minute we stop communicating, that's when we resort to violence. They say love conquers all. I truly believe that. But people need to remember to love. I think love has fundamental roots in consciousness. After all, in mythology, Eros and Psyche were in love. And it doesn't take a lot to psychologize myths and that. Beneath the colourful language and romance, there is an underlying reality, an underlying truth. I've had to tell a certain person I fell out with, who misrepresented me and my intentions on another show, that I'm neither on the left nor on the right, as I see both as two cults more concerned with scoring points than truth. So these people can quit trying to strawman me, because like Thomas Ferguson, I'm a centrist, well aware that the Overton window shifts. My challenge to the person I fell out with was to provide proof, namely a clip, would suffice, of Charlie Kirk complaining that black people are taking over white America, which was what she was claiming he'd said. What followed was that she failed to come up with evidence, and her far regressive leftist brain malfunctioned, as it were, when I suggested that the reason why she couldn't provide it is that such evidence doesn't exist. She just flew into a fit of rage. Whether that was a symptom of cognitive dissonance or something else, I don't know. She happens to be the co-host of the aforementioned podcast, and some of you will know whom I'm referring to. I also have contempt for the host because he decided to turn our disagreement into a show in my absence and have his co-host quote me and distort my statements in my absence, when I had specifically asked him a few times to wait for my availability, as my wife had a major medical operation and would require my utmost attention. I told him I needed to focus on my wife and needed at least 2 months to help with her recovery. He seemed to agree to my request, but went ahead with a live show about the disagreement where both misrepresented me, claimed to know my feelings and intentions at the time, and named me twice during the show, when at the start the host announced that the person they would be quoting, namely me, would remain anonymous, before the co-host proceeded to make me out to be some kind of coward for not showing up. Only I do show up at the very end, very angry that they had gone behind my back, and I'm only on for about a minute to reprimand them both, even though the host decided to mute most of my speech, practically censoring my say, and the fact that I was defending myself against someone who had already been talking about me and what she construed to be my views for well over an hour. What was agreed between me and him was that once my wife recovered, I would guest on his show to debate his obnoxious co-host, who had already made some false accusations against me on Facebook, and he also lied about my wife on the show. My wife never reached out to him. My wife never contacted him, as he claimed. I had even promised him that once the 2 months were up, I'd appear on his show with respect, being cordial and sticking to the topic. Well, he didn't keep his end of the bargain and pretty much betrayed our friendship. I have no time for people like that who practically think it's wrong to lose your job because of something that was stated on the job, but they think it's okay for Charlie Kirk to lose his life for what he said. Of course, I'm referring to Jimmy Kimmel, who decided to mislead his audience and was suspended for that reason by his employer. Charlie Kirk was assassinated for freely expressing his opinions, and the co-host of said podcast, that hasn't been named, thought he had it coming and tried to save face by saying that, of course, he didn't deserve it, but. And when you say but, you practically disclaim what you initially said in some sense. My challenge to the person had been very simple. Show me compelling evidence that Charlie Kirk was racist and that he complained about, quote unquote, white America is being taken over by black people. I told her that a single clip would suffice, as I've mentioned before, but she failed to provide anything. And when I told her that the reason why she had nothing to show is because no such evidence exists, and that Charlie Kirk never said anything of the sort, and if he was racist, he wouldn't get caught saying anything like that in public, even as a joke, she lost the plot like a blue-haired Destiny on steroids. She also brought my wife into it, accusing me of being her, using my phone during our interaction on Facebook, when my wife, who had been asleep at the time, was getting ready for major surgery the following day. My wife called her out on it the following day, and she gets called a bitch before being blocked straight away. An absolute Looney Tune, this person. And the whole argument and falling out started because she made a claim that she couldn't support, and she wasn't the only one who made false claims about Charlie Kirk after his assassination. The New York Times claimed Kirk was an anti-Semite for saying on an episode of his podcast that Jews have been pushing the same hatred against whites that they claim to want people to stop using against them. But Kirk was reading someone else's tweet and immediately critiqued it. It wasn't his statement. It just goes to show that sometimes podcasts can be more reliable than newspapers. God forbid you decide to do a historical piece on your podcast and you quote Hitler verbatim about Jews. Someone could clip that and tarnish your reputation. It's slanderous. And Stephen King is guilty of not fact-checking statements made on Twitter, which is what made him tweet that Charlie Kirk advocated stoning gays to death. I've seen Kirk stating in public that gay people should be welcome in church and vehemently argue against a homophobic Christian student who was accusing him of not being a real Christian in turn. And there's also being another lie propagated by his political enemies, which the aforesaid co-host also shared, claiming that Charlie Kirk said black women don't have the brain processing power to be taken seriously. But the reality is that Kirk was calling out four specific individuals who continually promoted anti-white and anti-Asian affirmative action policies. Michelle Obama, Sheila Jackson Lee, Ketanji Brown Jackson, and Joe Reed. And here's the Charlie Kirk quote verbatim. They're coming out and they're saying, I'm only here because of affirmative action. We know you do not have the brain processing power to otherwise be taken really seriously. So that was the quote by Charlie Kirk. He didn't mention their skin colour, and I'm pretty sure Candace Owens wouldn't want anything to do with him if he did, as she was the communications director for Turning Point USA. And I practically disagree with most of what Candace Owens says. There's just too many conspiracy theories that she subscribes to, not to mention the fact that she clashed with Ben Shapiro and was fired from the Daily Wire for allegedly making anti-Semitic comments. Anyway, the person I had a beef with tried to make claims from authority stating that political experts agree with her, as if experts can't be wrong, as if experts can't be biased or have nefarious agendas. Apart from parroting claims made by the far left, she also failed to name these experts that apparently agree with her, and that's supposed to be some kind of validation according to her standards. And apparently, according to her, only the right politicised Kirk's assassination, when it's easy to see that both sides of the political spectrum have done it. Prior to Charlie Kirk's assassination, she had debated a truly racist individual by the name of Al on the show that she co-hosts, and she compared him to Kirk, but they were worlds apart. And like Charlie Kirk, this guy was clearly blaming, quote unquote, the demographic as a euphemism for the black community. Charlie Kirk has clearly blamed powerful white men, such as former President Lyndon B. Johnson, for problems in said communities, even acknowledging that the CIA peddled heroin to kids in predominantly black neighbourhoods, and saying that things today are not as bad as the Jim Crow era isn't necessarily denying the existence of racism. It is also uncalled for to expect someone who's grieving to behave a certain way, as this individual did during our interaction. So I stand by what I told her before. People grieve in different ways, and I found Erica Kirk's reaction very human. Many of us in her position would struggle to have some grace in front of cameras, let alone worry about being responsible to the rest of the world. In fact, it would worry me if she were more collected than what she already is. How she grieves isn't anybody's business anyway, so it's uncalled for to attack her for how she does it, especially shortly after her husband's murder. Nobody knows what it's like to be Erica, having had her experiences in life and grieving the way she does. And it's ironic that during our confrontation, this YouTuber practically asked me to try to see things her way, and yet failed to put herself in the shoes of a grieving widow. And this is one of the reasons why I begrudgingly ended up calling my opponent a sociopath, which didn't help the conversation. But then again, I was dealing with a highly unreasonable individual. She may understand the pain of losing someone, as she claimed. From her perspective, I don't know her well enough, but she is clearly unable to empathise with Erica's. And this individual claims to be an idealist, but seems to neglect the fact that personal minds can vastly differ. She also knows about Carl Jung and psychological projection, but that didn't stop her from calling me unhinged, even though she was the one using expletives in a clearly over-emotional state during our altercation. So I don't devote my time with people like that. I won't spend any more time of people of a real ilk, and excuse me, because such people are, they're not worth it, and they are not concerned with being right. They just care about winning arguments. This individual clearly doesn't have a clue and has a problem with people disagreeing with her, which is precisely part of the problem when it comes to salvaging a modicum of free speech versus those who believe getting assassinated is the chickens coming home to roost, which is no different from the obnoxious opinion that 9/11 was justified for the shenanigans of imperialist America. So, contrary to what this person claimed, Charlie Kirk didn't make a career out of calling out black people in particular. He also attacked Jimmy Carter, Joe Biden, and Vladimir Putin, all of whom happen to be white. And he also said that we can all learn from Malcolm X, who was a controversial figure who had his own journey of tragedies, rebellion, and ultimately senior wisdom. Yes, it is true that in the closet racists can publicly spout non-racist rhetoric, which is precisely why I used the qualifier officially before the word racist during that Facebook debate. When people make allegations of racism, the onus is on them to prove it, and there was no evidence of hate speech or hate crime presented, and I contend that said person hasn't done so yet, when we also see instances of Kirk having criticised white people, namely a former president whose political career spans decades, and again proving that holding qualifications and accolades, be that highly esteemed positions of power or gold medals, does not make one immune to criticism by others. Charlie Kirk criticised Simone Biles, not because she's black. There is absolutely no evidence of that. What there is evidence of is him specifically attacking her own statements, which he was free to do so, as anyone can have an opinion about observed facts. In particular, where Biles said she felt like she was doing it for other people, she was complaining about this, rather than herself, which appeared to contradict the Olympian ethos of representing one's country, thus ultimately doing it for other people, which was Charlie Kirk's point. Regardless of whether Charlie Kirk was right about her sociopathy or not, he still had the right to point out that Biles showed up to let her team down. I would also point out that there is no point in rehashing opinions that were expressed in life, especially when Kirk is no longer with us to defend himself or even rectify some of his mistakes, let alone betray a paradigm shift, as much as the opposite side would like. Unfortunately, many so-called liberals in the aftermath of his assassination only paid attention to his criticisms of people who happened to be black, whilst ignoring those he attacked from other ethnicities, including white folks. The trouble is that one can too easily be swayed by one-sided propaganda and get cocooned in a political silo of information, and I believe that's what was happening in the podcast I've mentioned. So, regardless of what he truly was in private, uh, there is no evidence that Charlie Kirk was racist, and the onus to prove an affirmation is always on someone who makes a claim. Just as the onus is on the Christian to prove that Yahweh exists, and the onus is on the strong atheist who boldly proclaims God's non-existence, that he doesn't. So I don't believe the charge of racism here until I see compelling evidence. Excuse me, because there are numerous instances of Charlie Kirk defending the black community against misguided white kids who often employed identity politics, or even Charles Murray's The Bell Curve, to justify racist ideology based on questionable statistics and IQ tests. And I also see a lot of quotes being taken out of context on both sides, by the way. And then there is AI technology being used to also besmirch Simone Biles. We live in an age of great misinformation and increasingly headed towards epistemological bankruptcy, so it is always wise to constantly ask, how much can I truly claim to know? And here's a message to those sociopathic enemies of Charlie Kirk who, like the individual I fell out with, claimed that they were being gaslighted into caring. When it comes to the death of a human being and a grieving widow, you don't need or shouldn't need to gaslight people into caring. You either care or you don't. Besides, it's basic humanity to feel for his family, especially his kids. No need to hear from either side of the political spectrum to decide whether one cares or not. I've been taught to never speak ill of the dead unless they happen to have been a mass murderer like Hitler, which Charlie Kirk wasn't. And that may be the brunt of the problem. Largely young, impressionable minds going after whom they believe to be dangerous fascists and neo-Nazis. Minds brainwashed by defamatory propaganda, appealing to egos, seeking national recognition of heroism by taking out the next potential Führer, like some kind of modern-day Operation Valkyrie. Kirk's expressed opinions in public were well within his rights, as he did not break any laws, and he was also never defamatory against Biles either, as her actions, regardless of how one might interpret them, check out. It is also asinine to make claims about someone without any concrete evidence and simply relying on memes or basing arguments on quotes completely taken out of context or distortions. Whoever used AI to defame Biles is surely criminal. But what Charlie Kirk stated on said episode of his podcast was not. Unfortunately, both sides tend to politicize everything, not just Charlie Kirk's assassination. So again, to pretend it's only coming from one political camp is disingenuous. And the argument that we shouldn't empathize with Charlie Kirk for what happened to him because he was dismissive of the concept of empathy is hideous and moot. The empathy thing, as I pointed out before on Facebook, is largely a disagreement on semantics. The argument actually precedes the success of Charlie Kirk and was proposed by a team of psychologists who made a distinction between empathy and compassion, where the former can be detrimental to the empath and the latter acknowledges the suffering of others, but is better able to provide solutions. They are nuances. They are nuanced expert definitions which Kirk clearly employed and differ from the quotidian or colloquial understanding where both terms are often conflated. Here's what Charlie Kirk said, and I quote: "I can't stand the word empathy, actually. I think empathy is a made up New Age term, and it does a lot of damage. I much prefer the word sympathy. But it is very effective when it comes to politics. But sympathy I prefer over empathy." Unquote. See, it's a nuanced quote being twisted for political gain. I don't think Charlie Kirk said he could no longer relate to the next man as was claimed. Maybe it was a semantic miscommunication where some people make a perhaps pedantic distinction between empathy and compassion, where it is argued that the former can be detrimental to the empath, who will then be psychologically unable to provide support or a solution to the original sufferer, whereas the latter conveys more of a healthy relation whereby a compassionate or sympathetic person will acknowledge the suffering of another without having to share their level of depression, and subsequently be able to offer support, advice, and solutions to problems. I believe that's where the nuance lies, which is being missed by many, deliberately or mistakenly, and misconstrued. A Charlie Kirk making a public admission of sociopathy. Regardless of semantic differences, a psychopath will feel neither empathy nor compassion, and I see no evidence of that in Charlie Kirk. The reasons for his claim about the Civil Rights Act being a mistake is also very nuanced, which brings up the assault on the concept of a nuclear family, and how President Lyndon B. Johnson, a white guy for those who like to pay attention to skin colour by the way, did a disservice to black communities with his rhetoric and political activities from what I've gathered. These are things that Kirk cursorily explained to college kids on campuses, and the black pilot remark he made, which still circulates to give him a bad name, is also part of a bigger argument where Kirk was clearly making the argument that he'd rather want to know that someone is qualified to fly a plane than having that role solely based on the colour of his or her own skin. I have seen that in context myself, and I am quite frankly dismayed by the number of misleading clips of circumcised statements where the context is completely lost. I'm not going to go into DEI because I'm not really sure what it entails, and I don't live in America to know how it works exactly. But I will say this: maybe Kirk was misinformed about it, maybe he wasn't. Nobody is expected to be perfect in every opinion, but I have come to agree with his distinction between equality of opportunity and equality of outcome. And let's face it, the word equity, which is included in DEI, very much implies an emphasis on appearances in institutions rather than truly examining what the reality might be. When I went to college in my teens, in the late 90s, I had a good teacher who let me in on a political secret about the college. I was shown a secret file which showed that the college had to count heads and had to admit the same number of blacks, whites and Asians every year, regardless of qualifications or certificates, to ward off racial disrepute. It was equality of outcome over equality of opportunity. It was already rearing its ugly head back then. It precedes the woke movement by many years. This is precisely what Charlie Kirk was facing head on. He didn't just attack prominent black individuals as woke maniacs and the Antifa lunatics, like the Antifa lunatics like to claim. He he also praised some black people, and has also opposed white people for their views. So I see no connection between Kirk's rhetoric and racial discrimination, none whatsoever. And not that it should matter, but I happen to have black and white family. I'm racially mixed. I have seen my black cousins on my African mother's side grow up into great men who made their parents proud and didn't let racist arseholes out there deter them, because they didn't have a defeatist attitude and certainly didn't subscribe to a victim mentality. Unfortunately, in this day and age, certain nefarious narratives and political agendas target youngsters and minorities to make them feel like they are always discriminated against. Youngsters, in particular, start to believe that. And, they believe that they've been hard done by when life can practically be challenging to everyone. Children can be easily brainwashed into believing that they didn't get as much as they deserved growing up. They are taught to be self-entitled. I've seen this happen to my little sister when my psychotic eldest sister influenced her to get back at my mother out of jealousy. My pampered little sister ended up believing that childhood in the 70s and 80s was much better for everyone. And this, despite the fact that my little sister grew up amongst adults and was literally given everything she wanted, like spoilt rotten. She very quickly became ultra selfish to the point of wanting to go out every night, literally every night, at the age of 12. That's not right. And coming back as she pleased, and started stealing money and even threatened my mother with a knife before finally running away from home to live with my eldest psycho of a sister who knows her every move, knows exactly what she wants, what makes her tick, because she brought out the self-entitled personality in my little sister. And now she controls her life. Now she blackmails my little sister. She says, do as I say now. Now she's worse off than she was before. Do as I say, because I gave you everything before. Because I set you free. So now you're beholden to me. I believe something similar is happening to youngsters in this day and age, where they are fed a lot of propaganda that turns them into ungrateful, self-entitled and self-interested snowflakes. Because now they complain about everything. There's a protest for absolutely everything. There are far more protests now than ever before. And I believe that social media has to answer for that. Politics is very much all about power grabbing to the detriment of deontology and morality, and kids are being corrupted by deconstructivism, postmodernism, and moral relativism, and nihilistic ideologies with self-interest and an emphasis on horrid social Darwinism. It's sick. Now they erroneously think that billionaires like Elon Musk are know-it-alls that their examples should be followed even if they behave unethically. The person I argued with, who is only slightly younger than me and has kids herself, defended Simone Biles on the grounds that she's a successful woman and therefore she's automatically unassailable, as if she could do no wrong by virtue of being accomplished and rich, implying that respect is measured by one's income. This is the mentality of today. I honestly call the left of today, the regressive left. It's not progressive, it's regressive. There used to be a progressive left, a truly progressive left. I was one of them. Now it's regressive, as I see it. And I'm in the centre now. I don't care how successful Biles was, nor anyone should care about that, for that matter. Even President Donald Trump, whom Charlie Kirk supported and endorsed, shouldn't be immune to criticism. Despite his successful political career in power, I will still criticise President Donald Trump, the president, and call him out for saying something stupid like bleach being a cure for SARS-CoV-2. You know, whatever the status of a person, if I think they are being idiots, I will say it. I don't really care about the left and right as they exist today. As far as the Overton window has shifted since my day as a youngster, I think both camps, especially in America and here in Britain, are cults that don't have much regard for what is truly factual. But I maintain that so far I have not seen a shred of compelling evidence that Charlie Kirk in particular invited violence. But I have certainly seen someone like Stephen Kenneth Bonnell II, aka Destiny, do so unabashedly. Now, saying that Republicans should be killed more often to keep them frightened of opening their mouths is encouraging more political assassinations and violence and reeks of political intolerance and fascism. Saying that a particular assassination was a tragedy but is never a good sign in my book, because if, you know, it subsequently appears to justify murder, the problem is the word but. When the far left, in response to Kirk's assassination, states that words carry accountability, I agree only to the extent that people own up to what they've said, but not that those words which express political opinions are to blame for an assassination. The assassin is to blame. I would defend Charlie Kirk's right to say absolutely anything, even if he said he thought Adolf Hitler was great, which he didn't. And hopefully nobody will clip that, because if they clip that last bit, I'll look bad. You know, I'll be seen to be endorsing Hitler, which I'm not. And I will always solely condemn those who commit murder over some public speech. I also find it repulsive that people expect a grieving widow to behave a certain way. Let me make this saliently clear. I don't know what I would do if someone murdered my wife, but I sure as hell know that I wouldn't be calm and would not be calling for peace. And I hate that certain people criticised Erica for initially wanting revenge and wanting someone to pay. I imagine I would want to respond like hell hath no fury, like a widower. Until you find yourself in that situation, I think you should reserve judgment. So I completely empathise with Erica's they have no idea what they've unleashed, especially after hearing the reasons and political affiliations of the shooter and how vile one side of the political spectrum reacted. Try telling a widow who has just lost her husband to murder, you need to heal, and see how that works out for you. If I lost the love of my life, I would never want to heal or recover from it. Certainly not ab initio. I would grieve forever, and nobody would be able to tell me otherwise, because I love her, period. And yes, I would want the cruel world that took my beloved to burn, That would be my initial reaction. And I certainly wouldn't forgive virtue signalling sociopaths making lies about my murdered partner. Racism and all forms of discrimination will sadly always exist. But to claim that it's systemic and happening everywhere, as the far left tried to do, is not helpful and will never deliver the utopia that they promise. In fact, they are breeding a new form of racism with identity politics, which is divisive and contrary to Martin Luther King's dream, where people are judged solely on their actions and not the colour of their skin. Judgment should be on people's actions. Skin colour doesn't matter. It's just pigmentation. The individual I blocked cited, in good faith or dishonestly, I don't know, 11,000 hate crimes in America every year, which may seem like a big number at first, but I find it comical. Seems like a big number until you consider, say, the size and population of the country. America's a big country. It's not a big number when you say realise that there are close to 13 million people here in London alone. We also have problems with knife crime, which shouldn't be downplayed. But what really doesn't help us here is the fact that British youth is influenced by what happens in America, where people are pulled from pillar to post by what are clearly two political cults, one clearly interested in claiming that people like me are blind to racism, which is not true, and whilst I acknowledge the existence of racism today, I disagree with the adjective systemic that people append before it. And I also believe that racism was a lot more prevalent during the days of Enoch Powell in Britain and the Jim Crow laws in the States. So let me leave you here with two pressing quotes, one from Malcolm X and the other from Charlie Kirk. Here's the Malcolm X one. Quote, "This is the media, an irresponsible media. It will make the criminal look like he's the victim and make the victim look like he's the criminal. If you aren't careful, the media will have you hating the people who are being oppressed and loving the people who are doing the oppressing. This is sort of a propaganda tactic that I would call psychological warfare." Unquote. That was Malcolm X. He had his own journey and he certainly rebelled against the status quo in his heyday. I still remember the way Spike Lee's biopic dramatised Malcolm X's life. I rented it years ago from a Blockbuster video store before Blockbuster went bankrupt, and it came in two parts, and me and my wife ended up watching disc 2 first by mistake and wondered why the film had an odd start. Anyway, it's venial that Malcolm X was an angry young man who committed crimes and then joined the Nation of Islam in prison, advocated for apartheid, criticised racial integration, and didn't see eye to eye with Martin Luther King Jr. How could young Malcolm not be angry when his father, Earl Little, was murdered by the Black Legion? a group of white supremacists. It's understandable that he was persuaded by black supremacy and the black separatism of Elijah Muhammad, the leader of the Nation of Islam, who also mentored Muhammad Ali, as it happens. Eventually, Malcolm X renounced the Nation of Islam and joined Sunni Islam, but not before he was subjected to surveillance by the FBI. After all, as a member of the Nation of Islam and an influential figure to the black community, he taught that black people were the original people of the world and that white people were a race of devils created by an evil scientist called Yaqub, believed by the Nation of Islam to have been the biblical Jacob and also John the Revelator. Like Charlie Kirk, Malcolm X was assassinated, and there were mixed responses, but something that the New York Post said at the time was that even his sharpest critics recognized his brilliance. Something that seems to be lacking today in the aftermath of Kirk's assassination. And like with every assassination, there is always a conspiracy theory or number of conspiracy theories, from blaming local drug dealers because Malcolm X was against drugs, to blaming the police force and intelligence agencies like the FBI or CIA. It is also true, however, that the FBI was running secret programs to infiltrate and disrupt civil rights movements in the 50s and 60s, and it was found that the National Secretary of the Nation of Islam, John Ali, was a former FBI agent. On top of that, Elijah Muhammad denied any involvement, but then again, that's expected of any guilty party, really. Malcolm X himself complained that Ali made tensions worse between him and Elijah Muhammad, and Ali indeed had a suspicious meeting with Talmadge Hayer. I believe I'm pronouncing this right, one of the men convicted of killing Malcolm X the night before the assassination. We also get the same with Charlie Kirk's assassination, where people start connecting dots and make conspiracies sound plausible, where Tyler Robinson was only a patsy and that Mossad or even the US government took him out for calling for full transparency about the Epstein files, which implicates a lot of powerful people, including the president. Others blamed the followers of the Christian nationalist Nick Fuentes because apparently they heckled Charlie Kirk at his events enough times and deemed him not to be extreme enough in the far right movement. Almost said far left. Others said the shot looked like a professional hit, implying that it was the government or a terrorist organisation. I mean, to me, the official story still sounds plausible, and I'm not surprised at the number of conspiracy theories here. After all, we were bombarded with misinformation almost immediately after Kirk was shot. The investigation hadn't even started. I mean, like Malcolm X and Martin Luther King Jr., Charlie Kirk also sometimes used scripture to justify his beliefs, including who he thought had the right to the Holy Land in the Middle East. And he might have also upset a few people with that, but so what? You don't go and shoot the guy for it. As I said before, I disagreed with him on some things. I mean, He said that animals have no souls. I disagree with that completely, but he had the right to say that. Um, I also found him a bit literal when it came to scripture, and I disagreed with his theism. But I would still have a drink with him, and I would invite him for dinner at my house because he was friendly, polite, and a great conversationalist. You don't have to agree with someone on everything in order to like them. I would certainly prefer him at my house as a guest than some of the kids on Jubilee. That's for sure. Some of the kids were just downright rude and arrogant. And yes, we would probably clash at the table, me and Charlie Kirk, but so what? You know, I would probably ask him about why he would disagree with Carl Jung when this one said that religion is a defense against the existence of God. Um, we could have literally talked about anything, but now we will never get that chance. Not in this world, anyway. One thing we would agree on is the belief in the afterlife. I'm sure it would have been an interesting conversation if he had come on this show. I can only imagine. We would also talk about freedom and safety and how there is definitely a trade-off between the two in society. The social contract stipulates that you give up some of your freedom by following laws, and you operate under certain conditions where you pay taxes. In return, the state is obliged to protect you and treat you as a valuable asset. Your safety matters. Both are important. But I would certainly say that ultimately freedom ranks higher. What's the point of being protected if you can't move and do what you want, to your heart's content, including taking risks? There's no beguiling the passage of time that way. At the same time, it is nice to know that that you're reasonably protected by a community of the same species, and you can sleep at night without worrying about the dangers you'd have to face by yourself in the wilderness. In the wild, most of us would quickly realize that there's no freedom from worry. It's impossible to really feel free without safety. Duty to make sure that you survive is always present. It's always a calling, a calling to survive. It's a duty. If you really care about life, of course. So the key to feeling reasonably free is to know that you are reasonably safe. It's a balance that can bring satisfaction but doesn't guarantee it, because we humans are seldom happy. We have monkey minds. And finally, here's what Charlie Kirk said just days before his assassination. Quote, "When people stop talking, really bad stuff starts. When marriages stop talking, divorce happens. When civilizations stop talking, civil war ensues. When you stop having a human connection with someone you disagree with, it becomes a lot easier to want to commit violence against that group. What we as a culture have to get back to is being able to have reasonable disagreement where violence is not an option. Unquote. Well, that's that really. He said many other interesting and valuable things. He once said, "We have been indoctrinated to see the world through a politically correct lens," which I've included on the picture I've made in his tribute. He also once said, "Never give up, never surrender, and always go for the win." R.I.P. Charlie Kirk. Anyway, I hope you've enjoyed this soliloquy, and don't forget to like and subscribe to my channel. Thank you very much.